In December 1965, the residents of the town of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, noticed a strange object falling into the local forest. Immediately, they headed to the crash site. Cautiously making their way through the woods, they soon discovered an object emitting a flickering light. Up close, it resembled a bronze bell, and its surface bore strange inscriptions reminiscent of hieroglyphs. Several hours later, the area was cordoned off by the military, who stated that the incident pertained to national security. Questions about the object's origin and its true nature began to arise. Could it have been a spacecraft from aliens? These events became part of a broader discussion about UFOs, facts and fabrications, as well as the scientific perspective on this mysterious phenomenon. In folk history circles, such incidents create a stir, becoming phenomena of mass culture. One of the most famous cases was the crash of a flying saucer in New Mexico near Roswell. Had it not been for this crash, the town with a population of 50,000 would never have become so famous. Today, Roswell attracts numerous tourists eager to see the place where, it is claimed, UFOs fly. Every year in July, the townspeople celebrate the anniversary of this event, which many consider the event of the century. In July 1947, an object fell near Roswell. At that time, the base at Roswell was the only American nuclear base, and there were speculations that the military had discovered a flying saucer. Based on a press release from the military base regarding this incident, articles were published in newspapers. However, later the American Army recanted this statement, claiming that there had been a mistake. In reality, as the military stated, the object discovered turned out to be a weather balloon, not a flying saucer. This story did not develop further until the end of the 70s. At that time, one of the main witnesses, Major Jesse Marcel, who was at the Brazel field and personally examined the wreckage, stated that the military indeed discovered an extraterrestrial craft in Roswell. He claimed that the American Army had concealed the truth for 30 years. After this, other witnesses began to speak about the incident, whose testimonies could be more or less trusted. Information about Roswell quickly spread across the country and then around the world. Today, this story has become something of a myth, in which it is difficult to draw a clear line between true and fabricated facts. Statements made many years later presented the events in a completely different light than described by newspapers in the late 40s. According to the new version, in 1947, 2 flying saucers crashed in the desert near Roswell. One of them exploded in the air over the Brazel field, where debris was subsequently found, while the second landed on the St. Augustine Plains. According to testimonies, at the site of the second crash, the military discovered an almost undamaged spacecraft and the bodies of 4 to 6 humanoids. However, this story had 2 versions regarding how events unfolded. On one hand, witnesses spoke of debris found in the Brazel field. These statements were corroborated by official documents. For instance, Major Jesse Marcel gave an interview in 1970 in which he stated that the found debris did not burn or tear. If this lightweight material resembling foil was squeezed in a hand, it would return to its original shape. According to Marcel, before showing the debris to the press, it was replaced with the remains of a weather balloon. On the other hand, there were claims that the military discovered a spacecraft with the bodies of alien pilots, but, as a rule, these statements did not come from the first witnesses. In 1947, one of the most famous UFO crashes occurred, and its consequences continue to provoke interest and debate to this day. 2 weeks after Kenneth Arnold observed unidentified flying objects in the sky, an object, likely a disc, fell in the New Mexico desert. This happened near a secret military base where the atomic bomb was being developed. The military quickly removed this object from the crash site, as the Roswell base housed the only atomic bomb in the world at that time. When the military discovered the fallen object, they released an official press release claiming that they had found a flying saucer. However, they were soon forced to retract this statement, which became an established historical fact. At that time, rumors frequently circulated in the press that a flying saucer with the bodies of deceased aliens had been found somewhere, but these were merely rumors. It is possible that there were similar fabricated statements regarding the Roswell case, complicating the understanding of where the truth lay and where the mystification began. The case was closed and not mentioned again until 1973, when it caught the interest of Stanton Friedman. He gathered all available documents and compiled a more or less complete and plausible report. However, one cannot be 100% certain that everything Friedman described is true. Some facts raise doubts, and proponents of the conspiracy theory have exaggerated and embellished the data regarding this case. It is likely that the Roswell incident appears differently than it is being presented. Nevertheless, the crash of a flying object did indeed occur. There are two versions of events related to the incident in Roswell. One of them concerns the first alleged crash site to which Jesse Marcel was dispatched. There, a strange material was found, the properties of which were unique for that time. The fragments resembled aluminum foil, which did not tear and regained its shape after being compressed. This was testified to by several eyewitnesses, including farmer Mac Brazel, who discovered the wreckage, as well as Jesse Marcel, his wife and son, to whom he showed the fragments before taking them to the base, and the sheriff of Roswell. According to the second version, the alien spacecraft crashed, struck the Earth, but was able to take off again and fly a little further before ultimately crashing. It was at this location that the ship with the bodies of extraterrestrials on board was discovered. This explains why the Roswell case was classified. It is possible that we may never learn the whole truth about the crash of the flying saucer in Roswell. There is suspicion that the object that crashed in the desert was manufactured using technology that had no analogs either in America or in the Soviet Union. It is likely that an extraterrestrial object did indeed fall or land in Roswell. The explanation later provided by the military clearly does not account for what actually happened and seems implausible. Witnesses provided their testimonies, and it is unlikely that all of them were insane or concocting implausible facts. For example, Officer Exxon, who himself did not see either the wreckage or the bodies of the aliens, spoke of rumors that spread across the military base after the incident regarding a flying saucer and the bodies of aliens found in the desert. He also heard about the material with unique properties that was discovered. Who would think to test a parachute made of such material near a secret base? This seems an absurd assumption. Thus, it can be suggested that a flying saucer could indeed have crashed near Roswell. Similar crashes occurred both before and after 1947, and there is a number of evidences for this. In 1994, Stephen Schiff, a congressman from the state of New Mexico, decided to investigate the details of the Roswell incident. He contacted the command of the United States Air Force, but received a polite response that all necessary information could be found in the National Archives. However, in the archive, he was advised to contact the Air Force again. Not wanting to go in circles, Schiff turned to the commission that deals with citizens' complaints against government officials. As a result, the Air Force was ordered to grant him access to the archive. In July 1995, a report was published regarding the conducted investigation, which stated that some documents had either been lost or destroyed. However, the archive also contained papers related to secret projects that could shed light on the mystery of the incident in Roswell. When the Air Force opened access to its archive, they likely did not anticipate which specific documents would become public. Many years had passed, and no one really remembered that story anymore. When the documents were examined, conclusions were reached that ufologists had long been discussing. An unidentified object had indeed landed in Roswell. This was not a myth or mere rumors. The question was what kind of object it was. At that time, the Cold War was ongoing, and the main enemy of the United States was not a Martian, but the Soviet Union. The military was trying in every possible way to monitor the actions of the Russians, paying special attention to the development of nuclear technologies. The United States was in an intensified arms race. In case the Russians dropped an atomic bomb, the American military launched sensors into the upper layers of the atmosphere that were supposed to immediately detect the moment of the explosion. It is likely that the incident in Roswell was related to this project. According to some experts, this project provides a quite acceptable explanation for what kind of object landed in Roswell. The military launched a whole chain of probes into the air, several hundred meters long, to which measuring instruments were attached. This operation was highly classified. The probes were launched into the upper layers of the atmosphere for measurements, after which they fell into the desert. It seems that the farmer who discovered the debris in his field found only pieces of the probes, but assumed that they were the wreckage of a spacecraft, even though he had not seen the actual craft. He reported the find to the military base in Roswell, where they were unaware of the atmospheric research program being conducted at the Alamogordo base. When the military discovered the debris, they concluded that the fallen object was one of those flying saucers that had been so widely discussed in those years. Others picked up on this version. While the commission was working on the report, the Air Force decided to publish its own report. According to this document, which spanned 1,000 pages, the flying saucers had come from a planet called Mogul. In the first report, the incident in Roswell was explained by stating that a top-secret probe named Mogul had fallen in the desert. Such a project indeed existed in 1947 to 1948 and was created to determine the moment when the Soviet Union would detonate a nuclear bomb. Mogul probes were tested in various locations, including New Mexico, and often crashed. In 1995, the Air Force wrote a report explaining that it was merely a probe. The military admitted that after the incident, they had deliberately concealed the truth. The fallen object was not a weather balloon, but large probes that were used to detect the explosions of Russian atomic bombs. At that time, the operation was considered top secret. Although these probes proved to be of no benefit, their existence remained strictly classified. Therefore, the American military misled the press to hide the truth. The military investigated the Roswell case in 1995. Captain McAndrew, one of the authors of the report, discovered that an intelligence and surveillance program targeting the Russians was underway at that time. The operation was classified, but by 1995 it no longer made sense to keep it hidden. In the 1960s, the military did not discuss the incident, and when it was brought back to light in the 1980s, the project had long been closed. Everyone had forgotten about it, and no one saw the point in digging through the archives. A skeptical researcher notes, "I think we all slightly overestimate the capabilities of our government, whether in the United States, France, Canada, or any other country. We believe that our government is always aware of everything, but government structures no longer have any idea what their predecessors were doing 30 years ago. As a result, it was necessary to pull up the archives, and the outcome of the investigation was published in a report spanning 1,000 pages. However, the report itself was not that voluminous, as a large portion of the document consisted of various appendices and documents from that time. Almost 2/3 of this enormous report comprised technical details of the Mogul project. The report described minute details that could interest any researcher. After studying the report, one could confidently write a paper on this topic. However, it provided a clear indication that the best military experts working at the Roswell base at that time bore some resemblance to General Jack D. Ripper from the film Dr. Strangelove. According to the report from the United States Air Force, the opinions of the military at that time could not be trusted. The document emphasized that the military could not determine that the technology used to create the object was entirely earthly. Any farmer would immediately understand that this object was made by humans, not aliens. The photographs and diagrams of the Mogul project featured ordinary materials. Although the project itself was classified, its technologies corresponded to the level of 1947 and had nothing unique about them. Essentially, according to this report, the officers investigating the incident were incompetent. In 1997, the United States Air Force exhibited suspicious zeal and released a second report titled Roswell Case Closed. It clearly indicated that the military wanted to put an end to the rumors that a flying saucer with alien bodies had been discovered. However, this was apparently forgotten in the 1995 report. The first Air Force report did not address the topic of alien bodies, which had been fueled by various rumors. Therefore, in 1997, they released another report that considered the facts overlooked in the first document. The military claimed that the rumors about found bodies arose after a parachutist dummy was discovered. When testing new parachutes and safety systems for military aircraft, dummies were sometimes used, but these tests were conducted in the 1950s, not the 1940s. Nevertheless, the Air Force presented exactly such an explanation. As people continued to ask questions about the bodies of the discovered aliens, the military decided to put an end to these rumors in their second report. They needed to somehow explain the second crash. As for the first, they convinced everyone that it was a probe from the Mogul project. Regarding the second, they stated, "Well, these people, the witnesses, may have been mistaken." According to the military, all witnesses seemed to have clear memory issues, as they could not accurately name the time when everything happened. According to the report, they likely confused events that took place in Roswell between 1947 and 1964, when test flights occurred, which they likely mistakenly took for the incident. As a result, a story about the second crash was concocted based on data relating to different times and places. The United States Air Force asserted that the incident near Roswell had nothing to do with aliens from outer space. The alleged crashes and found bodies of aliens actually testified to tests of military technology conducted in the desert near Roswell from 1947 to 1965. However, this explanation seemed unlikely to many. The military released the first report, and then a second one titled Roswell. Case closed. According to some experts, they did everything possible to gather information and present their vision of the events in Roswell to the public. However, some documents went missing, which, according to them, should not raise suspicions. Bureaucratic archives are vast, and it is not surprising that some documents get lost. One commentator noted, "Sometimes I myself cannot remember where I put something a week ago." However, he added that it is not worth looking for imaginary culprits in the disappearance of documents, especially considering that more than half a century has passed since those events. The only thing that, in his opinion, the military should not have done was to claim that aliens could have been mistaken for dummies used for testing parachutes and airplanes. "I think the dummies have nothing to do with it," he emphasized, pointing out that they began to be used later and that it is difficult to confuse a dummy with a dead alien. There was also a theory about Mogul balloons, but it also raised doubts. "In my opinion, it is quite doubtful that the commanders of a military base that houses an atomic bomb could confuse a balloon with a flying saucer," he asserted. The Mogul balloon consisted of 25 balloons connected by ropes and essentially represented a pile of inflatable balloons. "No one would confuse them with a flying saucer," he added, emphasizing that the best military personnel worked at the base. If the military truly made a mistake or were unsure, the question arises, why present false testimony to the press? The behavior from that side is inexplicable, he noted. If Colonel Blanchard indeed wrote the press release on his own initiative, he should have been severely punished, yet his career turned out to be successful, and he rose to the rank of general. Agree, there is no logic in this, he summarized. Furthermore, what about the statement from Jesse Marcel, who was one of the first to visit the crash site and claimed that the found debris was unique? He was accompanied by Sheridan Cavett, who worked in counterintelligence. In the United States Armed Forces, Cavett was interrogated, and their report contains a description of this interrogation spanning 30 pages. They tried to convince him that he had seen precisely a mogul balloon, but he stubbornly refused to change his testimony. Cavett stated that he knows very well what probes with transmitters look like, so he could not confuse them with what he saw at the scene, noted the commentator, emphasizing Cavett's insistence. Notice that there were 2 witnesses at the scene, and none of them confirmed that it was a probe from the Mogul project, as the military claimed, he added. In the reports on the Roswell case, the military asserted that the object discovered was not a flying saucer. They could not keep silent about this story, no matter how much they wanted to, he noted, emphasizing that he himself tends to hold a different viewpoint. Nevertheless, he believes that the government sincerely shares the military's opinion, although this did not define their perspective. As is known, the reports from 1995 and 1997 were far from truthful, he added. But the government tells people what it deems necessary, and it cannot be blamed for that. The authorities are primarily concerned with preventing panic in society. If they had stated that a flying saucer was indeed found in Roswell, it would have had very sad consequences, he concluded, imagining what could happen if panic broke out in such a large city as New York. How did it happen on that day when Orson Welles' radio adaptation of The War of the Worlds aired? At that moment, the government released a report to gauge the public's reaction. There are suggestions that the military conducts similar studies to understand how people react to information about UFOs. In 1951, an incident occurred that also raised questions, but according to some experts, the government is not striving to control society. Rather, they are trying to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. Nevertheless, the military's conclusions seem weak. They did not take into account the testimonies of the witnesses who were the first to arrive at the scene, and instead carefully selected facts that supported their version. However, even this evidence can be easily disputed. One such example is the photograph that allegedly shows the wreckage of the Mogul probe. This photograph was published in one of the local newspapers in Roswell in 1947. Nevertheless, Jesse Marcel claims that they actually discovered an entirely different material. The version that the military found the wreckage of the probe is supported only by this photograph, and there is no compelling evidence that the Mogul probe was indeed launched in the Roswell area at that time. The United States Air Force was compelled to write reports as society demanded clarifications, which led to the creation of the report of 1997. Ufologists accuse the military of refusing to seek witnesses of the Roswell incident, but the ufologists themselves are not without sin. There are numerous questionable testimonies that they accept at face value. One such witness is Glenn Dennis, who in 1947 worked as an assistant at the Roswell funeral home. According to him, in early July, the military called him and asked if he had any small plastic bags for transporting the bodies of children. He replied that he did not have such bags. On the same day, Dennis went to the military base and saw a strange flying machine on a truck. The next day, he met a nurse who claimed that she had assisted the military in conducting autopsies on the bodies of aliens. However, this account raises doubts. If the military had indeed discovered the bodies of aliens, they would hardly have turned to a funeral home for body bags. If such an incredible operation were taking place at the base, it is unlikely that the military would have allowed a civilian onto the territory of a secret base. And of course, they would not have displayed a truck with a flying saucer for public view. As for the nurse's story, Dennis proposed a new version of her fate each time. At first, he said that she died of cancer, then that she was killed in a plane crash, and finally that she died in her sleep at a military base in England. Despite the implausibility of Dennis's testimony, almost all books about the Roswell incident are based on his account or on other equally dubious testimonies. While accusing the military of concealing the truth, ufologists have not advanced in their research toward the truth. It is evident that all existing material evidence, starting from the film footage of the alien autopsy and ending with the remains of the flying saucer, has been clearly fabricated. The Roswell incident became so well known that people sometimes believe that nothing like it has occurred anywhere else in the world. However, in reality, similar events happened both in 1947 and later. In the book Behind the Flying Saucers, published in 1950, Frank Scully describes rumors of an unusual flying object and beings that crashed near the town of Aztec, New Mexico. Today, it is known that this information was received by the author from fraudsters, but this does not diminish the interest in the incident at Aztec, which is still actively discussed by ufologists. The incident in Roswell is associated with numerous rumors about the crash of a flying saucer near Aztec in the state of New Mexico. There are three possible explanations for this event. First, it could have been another flying saucer. Second, it could have been the same saucer that crashed near Roswell. Perhaps it encountered problems near Aztec but managed to reach Roswell and ultimately crash there. The third version, according to experts, is the most likely. It is known that a certain object did indeed crash near Roswell. It could have been a disk that was launched into the upper layers of the atmosphere for research purposes 10 years before the launch of the first satellite. However, if an unusual object did indeed crash in Roswell, then the incident at Aztec was clearly a hoax. It was reported in local newspapers and discussed on local radio. More than 50 years have passed since then, and today it is difficult to say whether it was true or a fabrication. If there are so many contradictory testimonies regarding the Roswell case, then perhaps we will never know the truth. On the 9th of December 1965, an unusual object landed in the forest near Kecksburg, which is located 200 kilometers from Pittsburgh. After its crash, several volunteers, including firefighters, went into the woods to inspect it. They discovered an object shaped like a bell, the size of a small car. Soon, military personnel arrived at the scene, who advised the witnesses to keep quiet about what they had seen. Under the cover of night, the spacecraft was transported to a secret base. Just like in Roswell, an object undoubtedly landed in Kecksburg. Some local residents are convinced that it was an alien spacecraft, while the military claims it was merely a meteorite. In this case, there were witnesses, including firefighters, who personally saw the object. Thus, this is not about rumors. The eyewitness accounts of the incident near Kecksburg sounded quite plausible. An unusual object fell from the sky, it was discovered, and then taken away somewhere. It could have been a module from a Soviet space station or something else. Judging by the descriptions of the eyewitnesses, even if it was made in the Soviet Union, it looked quite unusual. It cannot be denied that a certain strange object was indeed discovered near Kecksburg. Incidents involving UFOs occur not only in the United States. On the 4th of October 1967, the crew of a Canadian Airlines plane noticed a group of bright objects flying at an altitude of 3,500 kilometers. Suddenly, 2 explosions were heard, and the group of flying objects dispersed. One of the objects detached and moved in the direction of Nova Scotia. The author of the book, Dark Object, recounts the fall of an unidentified flying object near the coast of Nova Scotia in 1967. The night from the 3rd to the 4th of October was moonless, and the sky was clear. Local residents saw a beam of light extending 20 meters in one direction. 5 boats set out towards the mysterious source of light, sailing west along the bay, and then turned at a 45-degree angle. Suddenly, the object fell into the water, and everyone saw a bright flash of light and heard the sound of a strong explosion. People called the police, but no one even thought at that time that it was a UFO. They reported seeing an airplane fall into the water and that it was necessary to rescue its passengers. A police unit of 5 rushed to help. When they reached the shore, they saw a bright column of light rising above the water's surface, approximately 4 meters high. The police took out binoculars and saw that a trail less than 1 kilometer long and 30 meters wide extended from the place of the fall. Sparks appeared in the air as local residents who had set out to sea in boats tried to approach the site of the mysterious object's fall. However, it disappeared underwater before they could reach it. Bubbles began to appear on the water's surface, and a strong smell of sulfur was felt in the area where the object had struck. If it had been an airplane, rescuers would have had to act quickly to save its crew and passengers. Rescue boats arrived at the scene of the tragedy but found neither wreckage nor bodies. Searches were conducted by both police and military personnel from nearby bases. It was clear to everyone that it was not an airplane that had fallen into the water. Soon, a decision was made to investigate the bottom in the area of the fall. The search continued until Monday, after which it was called off. The military did not state that they had failed to find the UFO. They simply reported that they found nothing. Nevertheless, some local residents claimed that something had indeed been recovered from the water, which is supported by a number of documents. Essentially, all of this was supposed to end up in some military laboratory, but officially the military announced that the searches yielded no results. This incident was forgotten until the beginning of the 21st century. At that time, ufologist Chris Stiles decided to find the official documents of that investigation. His search attracted the attention of the producers of the American series Paranormal Phenomena. In 1995, they sponsored another underwater search. This time, the equipment was modern and the divers could stay underwater much longer. The area being explored covered a section where an unidentified flying object was supposedly submerged. Navy divers and volunteers searched the area for several days, convinced that there was something underwater. The Flight Control Center confirmed that on October 4, 1967, no plane crashes were recorded. All departing planes returned to the airport. In 1967, there was no opportunity to conduct serious research of the seabed. Most likely, only a few divers with flashlights went underwater at that time, unable to see beyond a few meters. Thanks to modern technologies, the military thoroughly examined the bottom, trying to find any signs of an unidentified object, but nothing unusual was found. If there was indeed some unidentified flying object, then in this shallow bay it could not have vanished without a trace. But where did it go? This remains a mystery. If the incident in the Shek Bay remains unexplained, then other stories about the crash of Honolulu may turn out to be blatant fabrications, invented by enterprising individuals for profit. In the summer of 1989, ufologists learned that a mysterious flying object had crashed in the Kalahari Desert in South Africa, near the border with Botswana. A report from the South African Air Force dated May 7, 1989, stated that the military, using an experimental model of laser weaponry, shot down an unidentified flying object. They then captured 2 humanoids who attempted to resist. The aliens were transported to an Air Force base located in Pretoria, and then, for unknown reasons, the humanoids were flown to the United States. The last known location of their stay was the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. One of the alleged UFO crashes that occurred outside of America happened in South Africa in the Kalahari Desert. One of the ufologists, Cindy Height, who personally investigated this case, came to the conclusion that it was a clear fabrication. Unfortunately, Cindy is no longer with us. She believed that behind the story of this crash were con artists who decided to profit from this highly sought-after topic. But what were the true intentions of these people? This can only be speculated. I cannot provide a detailed account of what Cinti was able to find, as I did not participate in this investigation. Trust in Cinti Height is beyond doubt. She sincerely believed in the UFO phenomenon and was convinced that we are indeed visited by emissaries from other planets. This belief was much stronger in her than in many skeptics. However, even her presented evidence could not convince anyone that a flying saucer had crashed in the Kalahari. Although he did not have serious information on this matter, he tends to agree with Cinti's conclusions. She uncovered several suspicious facts. For example, the so-called official report was written in English, rather than in the official language of Pretoria, which already raised questions. Furthermore, she found it strange that the report contained many spelling errors. Moreover, it mentioned the title Major of Aviation, which does not exist in the South African Army. This title exists only in the British Royal Air Force. Additionally, this document was presented to the public by the notorious con artist James Van Gruning. There have been many books written about the crash of Hanel, but they all suffer from the inability to provide tangible evidence. If flying saucers truly fell to our planet, then where are they? Perhaps they are lost among thousands of other crates in warehouses, like in the famous film Raiders of the Lost Ark? And where are the bodies of the aliens found in Roswell? If so many crashes occurred, the Army would not have been able to remove all evidence from the scene without a trace. It is hard to believe that over all these years, not a single military personnel attempted to photograph or film one of the crashed flying saucers. People secretly film executions, murders, scenes of rape, nuclear bomb tests, genetic experiments, yet no one has yet captured a crashed flying saucer on camera. There are claims that the absence of evidence does not necessarily mean that the phenomenon does not exist. However, over all these years, no irrefutable evidence of unidentified flying object crashes has been found. Perhaps for those who believe in the UFO phenomenon, these words will serve as a consolation. In the next part of the program, the conversation about the mysterious phenomenon of UFOs will continue, and an attempt will be made to look into the future.